Not long ago, the M1 Abrams was written off. Command considered it too heavy, too exposed, and way too sluggish to last on the rate needed. In this brutal era of FPV suicide drones, analysts swore these multi-million-dollar war machines would be permanently sidelined from the active combat zone. But the intelligence crossing my desk today points to a totally different reality. Ukrainian forces are refusing to abandon the Abrams. Instead, they are actively transforming this armor to absorb relentless drone strikes while preserving its lethal firepower and primary battlefield mission. Look, if these tactical field upgrades hold the line, the shockwaves won't stop with a handful of tanks. This could become a massive combat lesson, one the Pentagon itself is going to have to study. So how exactly are they retrofitting the Abrams? And why do these field modifications stand out from the crude armor plating we saw deployed earlier in this conflict? Are we looking at hard proof that main battle tanks are not dead, but evolving into a radically new phase? You and I are going to unpack this together. Ukrainian mechanics are overhauling the M1 Abrams for a kill zone where survival demands far more than just welding extra steel. Their objective is keeping the crew alive through drone swarms, yeah, but equally, keeping that 120mm main gun firing under brutal aerial bombardment. This is crucial intel, because heavy armor that simply soaks up hits but cannot return. Fire is essentially a bunker. It fails its mission. On the modern front line, the absolute ultimate test is whether armored divisions can strike effectively while enemy drones track their every single move. That is precisely why commanders are treating the Abrams as a dynamic weapon that must stay in the fight, not just a steel box waiting to buy a few extra minutes. Ukraine is fighting hard to salvage the true identity of the main battle tank. It absolutely must advance through zero-line territory, back up ground troops, and unleash devastating direct fire on enemy strongholds, or exposed trenches. To put it bluntly, the true value of these upgrades is maintaining pure combat lethality. Shielding the crew is essential, but pure defense means nothing if the machine loses its power to dominate the skirmish. This retrofit is the front line's desperate push to keep mechanized warfare alive in a combat theater where the sky above has become a permanent, deadly threat. It shows a fundamental shift in how modern wars are fought. Thick plating, heavy cannons, and high-tech targeting are great, but they absolutely do not guarantee survival out there on their own. Any tank that stops moving gets painted by artillery. A crew that reacts too slowly loses the tactical advantage. Any armor that fails to coordinate with nearby ground forces gets cut off and destroyed. The tactical nightmare here isn't simply stopping a shaped charge. It is surviving the blast to keep firing, keep rolling, and maintain cover for the broader assault within a zone entirely monitored by killer drones. Command isn't parading the Abrams as some invincible superweapon. They are frantically adapting it to a theater where speed, heavy firepower, and crew survival have to perfectly align. And honestly, that is what makes this current operation so critical. It signals that the future of armored divisions won't rely on raw steel thickness, but whether they can fight under 24/7 drone surveillance. Let's watch this closely. To strike that perfect combat balance, commanders aren't banking on one magic solution. They've ordered multiple brigades to field test wildly different defense configurations on the Abrams, hunting for a layout that deflects shrapnel without sacrificing its lethality. This trial under fire sets up the next chaotic chapter of the war, where frontline engineering becomes an arms race of rapid ideas against raw enemy firepower. The ongoing operation to harden the Abrams has exploded into a massive live-fire experiment, driven by battered assault units instead of guys in a lab. This matters intensely because Russian drone tactics evolve way too fast for slow, bureaucratic defense contractors to keep up with the grim reality at zero line. Rather than waiting for official blueprints, Ukrainian tank formations are testing scrappy concepts under intense artillery barrages and tweaking them through brutal combat experience. That makes this Abrams deployment less about one single super upgrade and more of a desperate, practical hunt for defensive measures that actually stop drones today. And here's the real takeaway for us. In next-generation warfare, Survival starts with the grunts, grease monkeys, and vanguard elements, taking fire first, who absolutely cannot afford to trust a training manual. Inside this chaotic testing ground, the 47th Mechanized Brigade provides the critical, foundational backbone of the operation. Their tactical maneuvers reveal a brutal focus on hardening the Abrams right at its very core. Command is tracking massive upgrades. They are stacking explosive, reactive armor and heavy side plating. It looks less flashy than those giant metal cages. But out here, combat survival means taking that brutal first hit without losing your critical firing systems or getting your crew killed. This reinforced baseline gives the armor more tactical freedom. It lets them operate in the red zone during those brutal, fleeting windows of modern combat. Look, this does not neutralize the drone swarm threat completely, but it seriously upgrades the Abrams' odds of staying in the fight. It supports the infantry, hammers enemy trenches, and extracts before the next incoming strike. Reports indicate the 425th Assault Regiment is escalating this tactic, zeroing in strictly on that split second before detonation. They are deploying massive steel frames and spinal grids based on a brutal, yet critical concept. If we can force an FPV drone to detonate before slamming into the turret roof, the hull, or a critical weak point, you mitigate the blast. That keeps the beast rolling. That is huge on today's battlefield. One lucky drone hit aborts the mission, leaves infantry totally exposed, and forces a whole assault column into lockdown. Now, intel shows the 1st Assault Regiment pushing the envelope even further. Their tactical setup proves they aren't just trying to absorb or deflect incoming fire. They are fighting to keep the Abrams fully operational as a lethal weapon. This is critical. Why? Because slapping on armor that ruins your targeting capability might save the hull, but it totally compromises the mission. You and I are watching Ukraine actively evolve the Abrams tank through brutal trial, error, and frontline repetition. They are not waiting for headquarters to hand down solutions. One squad reinforces base survival. Another tries neutralizing the aerial threat right before impact. And another engineers tactical cages that shield the armor without sacrificing a single ounce of combat lethality. This proves that real wartime innovation is bleeding straight from the active front, where every modification is violently tested. Does it keep the tracks moving and the crew breathing for another firefight? This is exactly why these developments impact more than just the Abrams program. Ukraine is not just welding scrap steel. They are rewriting modern armored warfare. Relentless drone swarms, satellite tracking, and fast strike capabilities are brutally punishing every single tactical flaw. Out here, every upgraded Abrams serves as a combat workshop, a live fire, testing ground, and a glaring warning. Armor doctrine must adapt immediately when cheap drones systematically execute machines that historically owned the open battlefield. They are buying just a few more deadly minutes of survival. Yet, despite these extreme tactical shifts, one critical question dictates everything we are seeing today. We aren't just asking how much heavy steel can be fused to a hull. We need to know if the Abrams can still operate as an apex predator with all that weight. The most vital intelligence on Ukraine's latest tank mods isn't the thickness of the steel. It is the tactical reality that this armor completely avoids locking the main gun. Those early Russian turtle tank designs trapped their own turrets. That might sound minor to civilians, but on the front line, it dictates if you drive a main battle tank or a sluggish steel coffin. Heavy armor proves its lethality not just by eating shrapnel, but by engaging fast, pivoting its optics, and delivering devastating kinetic strikes when mere seconds equal survival. Neutralize that mobility, and sure, the rig looks impenetrable, but its actual tactical value in a firefight drops down to 0. This is exactly why unrestricted turret traverse is the absolute core of this conflict. In current theater operations, ambushes don't just hit the front plate. Hostiles flank from heavy tree lines, hidden trenches, urban rubble, and firing points that expose themselves for just a fraction of a second. In this chaotic environment, our gunners have practically zero time to acquire the threat and squeeze the trigger. If that main gun catches on its own armor, target response degrades exactly when split-second speed means life or death. You don't just lose offensive firepower, you strip away defensive capability, because a heavy tank that cannot instantly return fire across its flanks becomes a massive, sitting target, regardless of how much steel they bolted on. Let's review the intel. Early drone cage mock-ups boosted survival rates slightly, but they severely crippled the vehicle's tactical flexibility. They threw a solid roof over the crew's heads, but critically choked the primary weapon system. The turret's rotation got blocked. That desperate trade-off might look tough in propaganda photos, where thick cages suggest absolute. Listen up. In actual combat, the true cost gets painfully clear. A heavy armor unit that has to pivot its whole chassis instead of just the turret becomes sluggish, totally predictable, and drastically less capable of backing up infantry taking sudden fire. If an enemy hardpoint pops up on a Dola's flank, a split-second delay costs lives. You and I are seeing Ukrainian forces fix that exact vulnerability. Their mission isn't just detonating incoming suicide drones further from the hull. The objective is keeping that M1 Abrams tactically lethal, even with heavy drone screens mounted. That makes this engineering push way more serious than a quick trench hack. Kyiv is keeping the Abrams a functional strike system, not simply a steel bunker absorbing hits. The beast still needs to smash strongholds, snap to sudden threats, and lay down direct fire for friendly infantry taking heat. We are watching a brutal lesson from this war. Armor that kills your reaction time is basically a death sentence. It might stop one explosive payload, but if the gun cannot shoot back fast, you lose the whole reason you deployed armor anyway. Ukrainian commanders get it. A main battle tank must stay lethal, not just durable. Keeping that turret spinning fast protects way more than gears. It locks in decision speed, immediate firing, solutions, and the raw power to lock down multiple threat vectors instantly. That is why this Abrams upgrade carries wider strategic weight far beyond one single firefight. It signals that future tank warfare design will be scored not just by thick steel plating, but by whether the anti-drone cages actually let the crew fight back effectively under heavy aerial swarm pressure. That tactical shift will shape not just Ukrainian frontline ops, but how NATO commands rethink armored warfare, crew survival, and rapid adaptation when cheap killer drones dictate every move. From here, let's compare this to those Russian turtle tank monstrosities we keep seeing. You and I can see the difference immediately. It isn't just about looks. It comes down to what combat capability gets prioritized once the shooting starts. Moscow's answer to the FPV drone threat has mostly involved welding massive metal sheds onto their tanks, but that crude fix carries a massive tactical price. Welded plates, heavy cages, chains, and scrap metal roofs might boost survival against a single strike. Yet, many of these Russian rigs turn into heavy, slow, rigid targets the second they hit the active combat zone. On a chaotic front line where anti-tank weapons hit from above or flank in seconds, losing that mobility matters just as much as the extra steel plating itself. Commanders do not judge armor merely by whether it survives taking a hit. We measure a tank by whether it can still aggressively maneuver, fire back, and displace before the next strike drone arrives. That is exactly where Moscow's heavy turtle tank strategy completely falls apart. They operate on the brute force logic of covering everything, but they completely sacrifice the core combat traits that made heavy armor valuable on the battlefield in the first place. By trying to block everything, these modified vehicles literally cripple their own ability to strike fast or effectively. That brutal trade-off becomes instantly fatal on a battlefield saturated with non-stop drone surveillance overhead. A clunky tank crawling across an open field simply gives drone operators way more time to track it, map its path, and coordinate the kill shot. Armor that struggles to pivot or retreat after shooting stays fully exposed far too long, drastically raising the odds of follow-up strikes from artillery or guided missile teams. Even if the first drone strike fails to penetrate, the sluggishness caused by that scrap metal armor traps the crew directly in the deadliest kill zone of the fight. From a tactical standpoint, too much passive armor actually destroys the basic survival it was supposed to guarantee. Dead weight gets you killed. Slow speed gets you killed. Bad maneuverability gets you killed. The rig looks indestructible, but its tactical options drop to zero. This is exactly why looks are totally deceiving in combat. A steel-covered machine looks invincible on camera. Yet, under a drone, swarm, it becomes a slow, predictable target that is dangerously easy to finish off. When armor kills mobility, heavy protection stops saving crews and actually becomes the weapon that gets them killed. Let's look closely here. Ukraine is hunting for a smarter tactical balance. The mission isn't making Abrams tanks pretty, elegant, or free from gritty field upgrades. Commanders will gladly accept a bulkier armor profile if the beast can still sprint into an assault, blast its targets effectively, and punch right out of the danger zone, kill zone, before hostile radar locks on. Command sees a radically different combat philosophy here than turning heavy armor into a slow turtle that survives but cannot dominate the firefight. Let's analyze this. A rig that stays intact but fails to cover infantry or punch gaps has saved its steel, but lost all combat value. That is the glaring tactical contrast. Both commands know exactly what we know. Recon drones make traditional armor exposure a complete death sentence. The real difference is what each force is willing to sacrifice. One doctrine trades crucial mobility for maximum shielding. The opposing side fights to maintain speed and lethal firepower so the tank stays a deadly asset. Once you shift that balance, the Abrams gets benched. You simply cannot run large, sustained, mechanized assaults under these current conditions. The frontline sitrep is clear. Armor roles are shifting because this battlefield mutated first. We are watching Ukrainian forces deploy modified tanks differently, while Russian command abandons massed mechanized pushes, relying instead on light buggies and small infantry squads. Rather than pushing heavy armor forward as a massive breakthrough spearhead, Kyiv launches hit-and-run strikes against isolated defensive pockets, rapidly pulling units back before hostiles can return fire. This tactical pivot screams one single word: drones. Massive armored columns are practically suicidal right now. The threat level is absolutely unprecedented. Roll out in the open, and you get painted instantly. Watched from above, then obliterated in sequence before hitting the target zone. That is exactly why both commands desperately overhauled their entire heavy armor playbook. The old Cold War logic of massed movement crumbles when the sky is absolutely swarming with killer drones, but Ukraine refuses to pull its tanks off the active front line. Command just narrowed their mission parameters and tightened the clocks. Under this new model, tanks are not expected to linger in the crosshairs or solo an entire advance. Their job is hyper-focused. They breach fast, hammer a hostile strongpoint with heavy direct fire, inflict massive shock, and immediately extract before Russian drone and artillery crews complete their kill chain. This is exactly why the modified Abrams is built for flash assaults. Its sheer tactical value is lethal speed, not prolonged frontline exposure. Loiter 2 extra minutes in the red zone, and a textbook raid becomes a deadly slaughter. This disciplined method minimizes exposure, saves critical armor, and turns every strike into a surgical hit, rather than a desperate gamble. Deployed like this, the Abrams transforms from a blunt force battering ram into a rapid shockwave of firepower. That does not diminish its tactical value. Out here, it might just make it far deadlier. A heavy tank crashing in at the perfect second crushes a firing point, suppresses hostiles, and rips a path wide open for the infantry. But this only works when armor operates as part of an integrated combat net. It dominates when paired with recon drones painting targets, synchronized with heavy suppressing fire, and assault squads stacked up to exploit the absolute chaos the tank creates. Break that operational link, and an upgraded Abrams is dead meat. Maintain it, and it shines as a Plengzik station. Lethal gear inside a synchronized kill chain. That is the raw truth behind this tactical shift. Kyiv isn't trying to rewind the clock on armored warfare. Command is adapting heavy armor to a brutal battlefield, where exposure triggers instant, highly precise destruction. Tanks absolutely still matter, but their combat role is totally different. The mission is no longer dominating grid squares through sustained pushes. The new directive is delivering vicious, compressed bursts of overwhelming force exactly when hostiles are completely off balance. That is precisely why these battlefield refits are so critical for Ukraine's southern counteroffensive momentum. You and I are watching these upgrades hit the southern front right at a tipping point. Advancing requires razor-thin, tactical windows, not miles of exposed armor columns. In this treacherous sector, a localized assault will collapse instantly if heavy support rolls in late or sits in the open too long. This battle space severely punishes hesitation. Enemy recon drones instantly detect movement. Kamikaze drone swarms follow within minutes. Heavy artillery then hammers the exact same grid before squads can even dig in, reload, or patch their wounded. This means every piece of armor entering the Somme. Any combat asset must hit hard and fast today. It has to survive that initial, brutal strike, drop heavy firepower right at the contact line, and bug out before the enemy zeroes in. That is exactly why these upgraded Abrams tanks are dominating the southern front lines right now. This heavy armor gives Ukrainian troops a massive edge for rapid assault missions, where light troop carriers just get chewed up without enough firepower to shatter dug-in trenches. Listen, the raw value of this main battle tank hinges on brutal speed, not just thick steel. Kyiv does not want armor sitting out in the open. They need a beast that wrecks enemy targets in a split-second window. A modified Abrams can smash a strong point, cover moving infantry during a fierce push, and rip open the front line before enemy forces rain fire from the sky. This tactical role is absolutely critical down south, where rapid openings might flash for a minute, then vanish under lethal drone swarms and artillery strikes. In that chaos, a war machine bringing devastating direct fire and enough armor to survive those crucial minutes offers way more than any light transport ever could, providing extreme protection for exposed squads. You and I need to understand these combat upgrades are fiercely operational, never just for show. They let Ukraine keep massive firepower lethal on a battlefield where old-school tank tactics are pure suicide, yet relying purely on light tactical units gets men killed. What makes this strategy brilliant is not flashy videos, but keeping one of the most savage weapons alive in a modern war zone that aggressively punishes heavy delays and slow movements. Looking at that brutal reality, a much larger tactical picture starts to form. This Abrams tank is no magic bullet. It serves as hardcore proof of exactly how heavy tanks still dominate when adapted to the absolute meat grinder of modern warfare. Ukrainian forces have not suddenly turned this tank into some invincible superweapon. What they achieved is far greater. They proved that heavy armor can still strike fear in a drone-infested battle space, provided it gets upgraded with speed and ruthless realism. Total invincibility is a myth. The actual mission is keeping this machine breathing, moving, and destroying targets under relentless enemy fire. That is the crucial takeaway today. Aerial drone combat does not delete armored forces overnight, but it absolutely forces a total rewrite of combat design, tactical missions, and how generals do. This massive shift impacts far beyond Ukraine. Every global military force will face this exact nightmare as killer drones swarm tomorrow's front lines. The burning question for defense commands is no longer if battle tanks will even survive. The real test is whether frontline militaries can adapt them fast enough to keep their lethal stopping power relevant under the terrifying pressure of modern drone combat worldwide. If this frontline dispatch helped you understand the brutal reality of war and why true peace matters far more than any tactical victory, hit that like button, share this intel, and subscribe. Every single firefight proves the fatal cost of delay and massive destruction. That is why hard-hitting analysis saves lives. Stick with military force for unfiltered battlefield intelligence that takes combat seriously, ensuring we never forget the ultimate price of peace.